Welcome to The Story Behind the Symptoms, a podcast from Symptomatic.me. Your host is David Clark, MD, a board-certified gastroenterologist who successfully diagnosed and treated over 7,000 patients with neuroplastic pain or illness. Each episode, we dive into our guests' life experiences to uncover the deeper causes of their symptoms. By listening to their story, you will gain insights that advance your own journey towards knowledge that becomes healing.
Hello, and welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms podcast. I'm the host, Dr. David Clark, and I'm going to be talking to Scotty Stiles, my guest, whom I've never met before, but we're going to have an interesting conversation about physical symptoms not linked to organ disease or structural damage. What I do is talk about the possible sources of those symptoms, and this is based on experience that I've had for the last 40 years with over 7,000 people who've been in a similar situation. So, Scotty, why don't we begin with you introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Scotty Stiles. I am a mind-body coach. I live in Toronto, Canada. So it's nice to meet you, Dr. Clark. You have been an inspiration for me in my healing journey. So it's great to finally meet in person.
Very nice to meet you, Scotty, and thank you so much for doing the podcast with us today. Why don't you tell us about the symptoms that you've had and when and where they began, and a little bit about the journey to try to find answers for those?
So, like many people, I would say this all began in childhood, really. Can't really pinpoint exactly a certain day, and everything was kind of a gradual onset. So, what I dealt with the most was it started with back pain, sort of maybe in the back, sort of hip, that kind of area. And as a teenager, I noticed, one day, this feeling of my back just sort of went out. And I thought, well, that's interesting, I had a lot of feelings and emotions that came up around this. Now I can maybe pinpoint what was actually going on in my life. Looking back, hindsight is 2020, and I can see that there were some stressors going on potentially. And so that was kind of my first sort of acute incident of back pain, but I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't, or injuring myself or anything in that manner. So my immediate reaction, I think, was I must be getting older, but I'm 17 years old. That's very bizarre. So this back and hip pain would kind of pop up every now and then, throughout my 20s. And again, I had this narrative of, well, maybe I'm getting older, or maybe I need to lose some weight. Maybe I carry extra weight on my body, or maybe I inherited my grandmother's bad back. So I witnessed her growing up with very debilitating back pain. At the time, all I was told was that she had osteoarthritis. And and so then the years would go on, and I would have, a good 3 or 4 days where I would have to be just flat, lying down, couldn't go to work.
3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days at times. Yeah, just debilitating back and hip, spasming. And I would do what anyone would do. Get some Robaxacet, take some Tylenol. I didn't know how this thing worked. I maybe kind of heard people taking heavier medication, thought, am I supposed to do that? I mean, we don't really know what we're supposed to do. And so I'd see, my doctor, my general practitioner, and he would say, this is probably fine. You can take here's some anti-inflammatories, take some Advil, that sort of thing, and you should be good. So nobody was really taking it seriously, nor did they really need to. I got better seemingly after a few days. And then in my 30s, it just progressed even more to the point where I had pain every day.
I just have to say for the audience here that 20-something person flat on their back for 3 or 4 days with back pain, that just makes no sense at all outside of a neuroplastic context. And the fact that your physicians were unable to investigate further for the sources of that is exactly the kind of thing that the Association for Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms is trying to change. So don't mean to interrupt, but please go on.
Yeah, that's great. And you're exactly right. I mean, in our 20s, not that age has anything to do with pain, but, my perceptions were wrong. And I thought, maybe I was managing it the way I thought I should be.
Yeah.
So I was working a job on my feet. So I thought, well, I must have just been on my feet too long. This is what we hear. And so, okay, so I'll just take a rest and I should get better. No doctor was telling me that rest is not going to help. In fact, I think, and then the opposite could be true too. Some people are told you sit too long. So that's causing your pain. So it's confusing now looking at it. Well, which is it? Am I standing too long or am I sitting too long? So anyway, so yeah, in my 30s, it became to the point where I had pain every single day. I was developing other symptoms of anxiety, panic, heart palpitations. I had pain that went into my shoulder. At this point, I didn't really see the connection that the back pain and the shoulder pain were kind of equivalents of the same root cause, obviously. I had bizarre symptoms of sort of like heat intolerance. I experienced the dry eye. Later on, I experienced pain in the wrist, feet. The foot pain was very debilitating. And tinnitus, a lot of health anxiety, intrusive thoughts, even some rashes. Interestingly enough, because I know you work with the gut issues specifically, that's how you got into this work.
Yes.
Never had any, knock on wood, I never had any of the digestive issues, which is so interesting. I mean, we don't know where this is going to afflict us, where the symptoms are going to pop up, but mine was primarily musculoskeletal.
Yeah, that's one of the mysteries of this condition, is why one person gets it in one particular part of their body or several parts of their body, and somebody else, seemingly coping with similar stress issues, gets it in a completely different part of their body. And so far, we haven't got a real solid answer for that, but fortunately, they tend to respond to the same forms of treatment wherever they happen to be cropping up. My personal record patient came to me with a printout from the internet on which he had circled 27 different symptoms that he personally was suffering from at that moment.
Yeah. And the only thing I can maybe think of now in hindsight, why it was my back and hip, was that there was a lot of pressure that I needed in order to walk and to move in order to do the job I was working at in hospitality. So, I can't just do that sitting down. I was working in a restaurant, so my income relied on moving my body. So that's high stakes right there to have things be working properly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so all of this led to the conventional treatments. I kept seeing my GP, who I trust, and he would refer me to have MRIs, X-rays. The MRI, they were able to find things like bulging discs, spinal stenosis, arthritis, femoral narrowing. This is all very scary sounding stuff for somebody that doesn't understand MRIs.
Yep. Yeah, there's
The
actual research on just how scary that is, and can contribute to exacerbation of the symptoms and contributes to more tests and invasive treatments. So yeah, it's just the language with which MRIs are reported can be part of the problem.
Right. Yeah. And so with that MRI, I was referred to a spine surgeon to see what their take was on this situation. And maybe it's a good thing I'm in Canada. Maybe the approach is a little more conservative, and they did not recommend surgery. Who knows, if I were living somewhere else or saw someone different, what they would have recommended. He suggested, his bedside manner was not very good. I felt very dismissed, and he just said, you can come in these are the days we do injections, and you can be on your way now, and you can go to this sports medicine clinic and do that sort of rehab stuff, which I'd already been doing. I'd already been seeing physiotherapy, chiropractors, massage, acupuncture. So I drove far out of town to see a Japanese healer. I tried all of these physical approaches that weren't working. And then, in fact, the injections made it worse, and I got no relief from that at all. And I think I know why. I think it was because I had so much fear and trauma around the actual injection procedure itself, just being laid down. I felt humiliated, demoralized, having to lie down and have somebody stick this.
Somebody's coming at you with a giant needle.
Exactly. I go home and I'm waiting. Okay, when is it going to kick in? When's the pain going to go away? And so this fear and anxiety of needing it to go away is actually what was driving the pain all along. But again, I did not realize this is what was happening for me.
My apologies for interrupting, but I wanted to ask you to become a member of the Association for Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms, so that we can continue to bring this vital science-based information to everyone who deserves to hear it. Thank you.
So this went on for a couple of years.
Years.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that nowhere along the way did anybody sit down with you and say, Scotty, what's going on in your life?
And now here's the thing too. I was doing a lot of Googling, which can be a bad thing, but fortunately, I did stumble across Dr. Sarno on the internet and his work. And he's written all these books, Healing Back Pain, The Mind-Body Prescription. So I read one of his books, and I started to embrace the approach for about a week. But then society and my roommate at the time, who said, oh, it's just in your head, and the MRI that I had, the doubt seeped in, and it overshadowed any of the insights that I was learning from Dr. Sarno. And I just kind of thought, well, maybe I can balance both. And then the Dr. Sarno information became kind of a distant memory. And so then it was another 2 years.
No.
Yeah. So I tried other things, like I did end up changing my diet, cutting out alcohol completely, because the hangovers were just going to make it that worse. I was using alcohol to cope. That was the only thing that would provide relief. But that's problematic in and of itself if I have to drink alcohol every day in order to not have pain. And then, I did get a little bit more relief by, learning a little more self-care strategies, but I still wasn't quite there yet, because I still was believing that my body was injured in some way. So, when I followed this really good diet and I cut out alcohol, I was feeling better about myself. So interestingly enough, I was getting a little bit better, and I was swimming every day, and I thought, oh, people say to swim for back pain. So those sort of things did start helping, because I was, in hindsight, I was behaviorally teaching my brain and nervous system that I was safe. The pain would still come back and completely floor me. I went on a trip to England in 2006. I was just on vacation wanting to enjoy myself, and I couldn't get out of bed till 5 p.m. some days. And so when I got home back to Canada, I went to a used bookstore and I saw Dr. Sarno, The Mind-Body Prescription, and the book just appeared to me. And I said, well, there it is. I see it's here again. I've really tried everything. And I took the book off the shelf. I took it home. I read it in a week. And that's where I officially committed, as I needed to make a commitment to do this. That's when I committed to the mind-body approach. Soon after that, I found your work and got your book. Your book was one of the first ones I got as well, back in 2017, 2018.
And from those two books, can you recall what most resonated for you, that made you feel like one or both of these books is about me?
And the fact that, that all pain is structurally caused, and that our psychology and emotions definitely impact the physiology of our body.
So you were aware that you had psychology and emotions that were not in an ideal state, let's say that, and that you could recognize that in yourself.
In some ways, yes. I wanted it to fit, but I was still very doubtful, because the physical pain is very real. So
no doubt.
I couldn't necessarily pinpoint what the maybe emotions were, or repressed emotions, or what was going on, but I certainly was open to the ideas of it, because it couldn't be anything else. And all of the science behind it made sense. So I had to, I suppose at that point, delve into what it could be, what could have created my nervous system to be more sensitized in this way. So it just became, the first part of it was just learning and reading the material and trying to apply it to myself. Can this work for me? Does this make sense for me? What is it that went on in my life?
Okay. And how many years was it in total, that from the time the symptoms began till the time you read these two books?
Over 15 years.
My goodness. Well, in our field, if you take care of enough patients, you see people who have gone on for even longer. But it still highlights the injustice that someone who's got back pain from a pinched nerve or structural damage is going to get vastly better care than you got for basically exactly the same pain, just from a different cause. And that all of these clinicians, both allopathic, Western trained and not, failed to look into these things that the books made you aware of. Someday it's going to be routine to inquire about these things, but until then, we're going to see people that just like you go for years or over a decade. My personal record patient had undiagnosed abdominal pain for 79 years and was still successfully treated even after that length of time. Do you recall if there was any one technique or measure that you followed that seemed to make a difference, that helped you to feel like this approach was going to work for you? And it may not. It may have been the totality of everything.
Yeah, it's both the totality and little things along the way that, brought this regulation in my nervous system. I think one of the very first things was expressive writing. I was doing Nicole Sacks's journal speak method. And within 5 months, I would say from the time I started at the end of 2017 to about April, May of 2018, then I discovered Nicole Sacks's work, and I was expressive writing, writing about my childhood, writing about my current stressors, and writing about my personality traits. And then that summer, I experienced a mostly pain-free summer. I was feeling pretty much like myself that I hadn't in years. I had been on the floor on a couch, not able to work. I had stopped working. And so here I am back to living my life, back to, riding a bike, back to running. It was like, it was almost like a miracle. Who would have known, right?
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a miracle. Did you have any really striking insights from the writing? I use a lot of writing with my patients and found it to be enormously valuable. Converting thoughts and emotions into words often means that they no longer need to be expressed via the body. Anything in particular that stands out for you there?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I never thought I had a big T issue that I had to deal with. Now, big T trauma. I would say most people have a little T, small T traumas. I mean, just being alive in this world, we all have little T's. So, it's interesting because I think I, even in therapy, minimized what I went through as a child. And so I grew up hiding my sexuality, like many children of the 80s and 90s. Being gay was maybe not seen as acceptable. Now, in my family, of course, they love and accept me, but it wasn't really talked about. So there was a part of myself I was hiding. And so in the journaling process, I accessed a lot of that and processed that, even though I thought I had dealt with it. I'm out to my family and friends. I thought everything's fine, but just having to have this secret as a child changed me in some way that maybe I'm unaware of. On a subconscious level, I think I became hypervigilant around other things because I was hiding my sexuality. I was very hyper aware of how other people perceived me. That formed my personality trait, wanting to look a certain way to people so that I wasn't being judged, this need for acceptance. So it led to a lot of personality traits like perfectionism and goodism that Dr. Sarno talks about that can put the brain on high alert and dysregulate the nervous system and cause this type of pain. So I really did form a dysfunctional relationship with fear. And so no wonder I had health anxiety, because any sort of jolt or sensation would scare me. And I would think I have to do something about this so that I can stay safe. And I was always trying to keep myself safe in many, many ways. My identity, I needed to keep it safe. And because a child doesn't know whether or not they're going to be abandoned. You hear these horror stories of somebody finding out that they were gay and then their family disowns them. That was my ultimate fear. And maybe not completely logical. And of course, that would never happen. But a child's brain doesn't understand.
That's right.
The impact of that.
That's right. Yeah, it's one of the things that took me some time to learn early in my experience with this as a clinician was that the little T traumas can be every bit as impactful as the big T traumas. The big ones is sexual abuse, physical abuse, violence in the home, severe drug use in the home. Everybody recognizes that those can be impactful. And it turns out, which again was a surprise to me, that the little T traumas can have the same long-term impact on people, can affect personality traits, can lead to repressed emotions, can lead to things that are triggering. And the common denominator between the two kinds of trauma is impact on a person's self-esteem, making somebody feel that they're a second-rate person, or that they're not measuring up in some way, or that, in some cases that they're worthless pieces of crap, frankly. And that can happen in any of a variety of ways. One of my patients told me after a fairly lengthy discussion that he recalled that when he was young, the only time he got praise from his parents was when he did something better than his brothers and sisters could do it. And he had 3 very accomplished siblings, and doing things better than they did them was not easy and didn't happen very often. So he grew up basically feeling like he could never measure up. And he carried that with him. Otherwise, his family life was unremarkable, but he carried that burden with him into his 30s when I met him. And it had the same kinds of outcomes that I see in people who've gone through much more obvious forms of trauma. But in your case, you are essentially, and this happens to a lot of my patients, living in a minefield, because you could never tell on any given day or moment when something really bad was going to happen. And in some of my patients, it's abuse of some kind that they can never tell. That, some days in their household, everything's fine. It's no different than in a healthy and functional household. But then on other days, something really bad happens. So they have to be constantly watchful about that. And the fact that you're different also is, impacting your self-esteem, because when you're a kid, as you pointed out, different is not usually better. Different is usually the opposite of better. And so you're carrying that and carrying the fear that somebody's going to find out. And on top of that, the fear that if somebody finds out, your whole family life is going to be lost. That's an enormous burden. The living in a minefield experience turns into, as you've already pointed out, constant watchfulness and anxiety. And it's only natural. If you're in a real minefield, you're going to darn well pay attention to where you step. And my patients who grew up in these environments, it's a vastly bigger burden than they recognize, because none of us has a parallel life to compare ourselves with. There's no straight version of Scotty that you can go talk to and say, hey, what were things like for you? And because of that, when you look back, you don't recognize the magnitude. One of the techniques that I often use, and that people who've heard me before are very familiar with, is to have people imagine what it would be like for a child they care about to grow up in that exact situation. And for a week or 10 days, you watch them try to cope. And how would it be to watch a kid in exactly the same situation try to deal with all of that, even for as little as a week or 10 days. And most people would find that extremely difficult. Most of my patients would find it extremely difficult to watch that and not be able to intervene and give the kid some encouragement and tell them that things are going to work out. And, that you can't do any of that. You just have to watch. The purpose of the exercise is not to mentally torture you. It's to help you recognize the reality of what you were coping with, and what enormous courage and perseverance was needed to live with that for so long. How old were you when you finally made the decision to come out to your family?
Yeah, I was 22, 23, around that age, which at the time I thought that was kind of late. I mean, now it's a lot different. I think a lot of people are coming out, teenagers, even younger. But in the grand scheme of things, I was still quite young, but definitely I was already an adult. So I'd gone through my whole teenage life keeping that a secret. And it's interesting when we talk about repressed emotions. I think I was repressing fear, because anytime I thought about it, I wanted to look away. So every time I thought, well, I have that thing that I don't tell people, we're just going to bury that, put that aside. And I think, with this analogy of the minefield that you're saying, it was kind of like that. It was kind of storing, this minefield that was going on in this subconscious part of my being that was going to later need to be released, because I was just repressing fear. I can't look at this. I can't look at this. We'll deal with that later. And even though I came out and now, I'm comfortable and all these things, I still had all of this stored energy. Something was going on. It's very...
My apologies for interrupting. Just to let you know that if you leave a review and subscribe to the channel, you will help a lot more people to find this information. Thank you.
Yeah, it can be any emotion that gets repressed. Most of my patients, it's anger about something that happened to them. I think in your case, that would not make sense, but fear makes complete sense. And other people, shame, grief, guilt. I have seen all of those be responsible for physical symptoms in one patient or another. One of my patients, where fear was the main emotion, had a completely paralyzed stomach, not the abdomen, but the actual organ of digestion. He came in, he couldn't keep anything down because his stomach muscle was essentially motionless. And it was 100% from repressed fear that was going on in his life. So the power of that to produce symptoms, and he wasn't consciously aware of it. It took me weeks of meeting with him to finally find my way to the source of what was going on. So it wasn't at all obvious, but to him or to me, but nevertheless fully powerful enough to shut his stomach down. We have a special test where we put nuclear medicine material into the stomach and we watch it and see where it goes and how fast it empties out of the stomach. And they called me from the scanning room and said, "We've had your patient down here for 2 hours and it's not moving. Do you want us to keep scanning him?" And I said, "No, we've got our answer." But incredible that the brain could actually do this to an otherwise healthy 24-year-old. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that the severity and the number of symptoms that you had from this.
And I would say too that certainly there are other emotions, and it's hard to know, is it more of this or less of this emotion? When you're speaking of feeling like you're not measuring up, I think that's kind of related to having to sort of hustle for having a certain identity. And, even after I came out, I had a lot of those still personality traits that I was using that were kind of coping mechanisms to make myself be seen as and looked at as a good person, and all these things that were just like how I wanted to be seen as straight and not gay. I was using that still, in my 20s and 30s. And so hustling for my worth and not feeling good enough and not feeling like I, was a successful person in this world. And that, I think, caused a lot of repressed anger too, and there's a part of me probably that just wanted to be free and not have all this pressure that I was putting on myself, and learn how to, ultimately with this work too, it kind of taught me that I needed to have more compassion for myself.
Absolutely.
Really.
Yeah. I mean, you're in a situation where no matter how good a person you are, it's not good enough. And this is another actually a value of that exercise of imagining a kid you care about coping with everything you did, is to, if you watch that happen even for a week or 10 days and the kid comes out the other end of it after 10 days and, you'd be high-fiving them, you made it, you endured that horrible experience. What a great, tough kid you are. What courage, what perseverance you had. You'd be, giving him a lot of appreciation for what they had just been through and survived. And that's after a week or 10 days. You went through it for years.
That's right.
And so I use that for people to try to internalize truly how remarkable they were. That many of my patients, another analogy I'll make is it's like parachuting into the Amazon jungle or the middle of the Himalayas at a young age, and through no fault of their own, they find themselves in this extraordinarily challenging environment, and they have to find their way out. And when they accomplish that, anybody who did that, we would think of them as heroic for what they had done. And if my patients can internalize that belief about themselves, it just brings the whole stress level down. That through no fault of your own, you found yourself in this tough place, very tough place, and you dealt with it. Yes, there were consequences to your body for 15 years, but, it's like getting frostbite when you climb Mount Everest. It's, one of the things that can happen. But giving yourself huge credit for that it's kind of a fundamental shift in self-image to one that's, frankly, more accurate. And when you can appreciate that, it makes a huge difference in other areas. So you don't need to be as people-pleasing. You don't need to tolerate toxic people in your life and try to, continually meet their needs, for example. And it also, another area that it's very helpful with is taking time for your own personal enjoyment. I don't know if this was an issue for you, but many of my patients, they are so busy proving their worth to themselves that they live as if on a treadmill they never get off. They don't take any regular time for their own joy. Become an issue for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that way of living is completely dysregulating. And I like to look at it as like, well, our brain has gotten so good at feeling not good that we forget how to feel good. And so we kind of have to, use the little bit of the ability that we have with our conscious mind to say, hey, there is a new approach here. There's a new way to, start actually regulating ourselves just by doing what would seem so obvious. Just have more fun. I mean, and of course, if you were to just tell somebody about this that doesn't know about mind-body medicine, they would think you're crazy. They would say, what? I'm in pain right now. How can I have more fun? But it is part of the process, leaning into joy, looking for these glimmers in our lives. It could be through nature. It could be through music.
Yes.
It could be things. I had one of my most profound healing moments before I even found out about TMS, neuroplastic pain. And I was at a concert and I was in a complete agony, but I said, I'm going to the concert anyway. I don't care. And so I went. Of course, the pain went up because I was socially anxious and I was not at home lying on the floor where I felt a little better. And so I said, I don't care whether the pain goes up, goes down. I'm going to sit at this concert and I want to be there. I want to enjoy this. So the first half of the concert goes by. And I'm still noticing my brain goes to the pain, every 3 seconds. That's how it works. It's going, it's checking in. Yep, it's still there. It's still there. And then something shifted about in the second act, you could say. And I wasn't thinking about it anymore. Well, I wasn't really feeling it anymore. And then when the concert ended, I ended up walking home that night.
Wow.
30-minute walk. And I was touching myself. Where is this? Is the pain? I thought it was magic. And I didn't even know about neuroplastic pain, but so this is interesting because something happened, something physiologically happened and shifted in me because I was authentically leaning into joy and safety. And so I wanted to, bottle that somehow and recreate it. But so that was kind of a clue, in retrospect.
It was a huge clue. It's what any pain reprocessing therapist would call evidence. That there was absolutely no reason for you to feel better physically. I mean, there was no biomechanical reason for your pain to go away. The only thing that was different was that you had an enjoyable experience, and only your brain knows that you had an enjoyable experience. Your spine doesn't know, your hip doesn't know, your shoulders don't know. So that would be a gigantic piece of evidence that a pain reprocessing therapist would be all over that. So that's a great story.
Yeah, I was uniquely practicing what is known as outcome independence.
There you go.
I was doing something that regardless of the outcome, regardless of the pain going up, going down, my mission to go to this concert was so powerful. It was overriding any of the desire to care about whether I was in pain or not, so much so that the pain went away.
Yeah. And it's a barrier for my patients to have experiences like that goes back to that feeling unworthy, that if you feel unworthy in general about yourself, then it extends towards experiences that are enjoyable. That, taking time out to put yourself on the list of people you take care of is something that an unworthy person does not deserve. So making that shift into thinking of yourself as somebody who found their way out of the Himalayas and it showed heroic perseverance in doing that, all of a sudden now, hey, you're a worthy person. You absolutely deserve to take regular time for joy and less time for continually focusing on the needs of others or people pleasing and so forth. Another issue I wanted to bring up is one of triggers. Again, don't know if you had these in your life, but many of my patients do, that something is going on in the present day that is more stressful than it would otherwise be because it links back to the past. And that can be evidence of a mind-body condition going on, and it can also be a source of physical symptoms. Did you have anything like that yourself?
Yeah, many triggers, even just certain physical movements became a conditioned response as a trigger. Even later on, after I had sort of healed, so to speak, I had this agonizing shoulder pain, and it was triggered by swimming. Now, most people would think, okay, well, I have repetitive strain injury. I've been swimming too much. I had some sort of overuse. I was swimming every day because it was COVID and I wasn't working. And so that was something I wanted to do every day. And then the pain just didn't go away, probably for, up to a year. And I went back to the physiotherapist, even kind of being a mind body expert now at this point. And I was fooled by it. I was fooled by this physical trigger. And that's all it was. It was just a conditioned response. It was just my brain predicting to keep me safe in this kind of way. And so that was when I learned more pain reprocessing therapy skills and tools, and really was able to unlearn that sensation in my body through things like somatic tracking and visualization. And I had to detangle this trigger in my mind that something structural was going on when it wasn't at all. It was just my brain's belief that something structurally was going on. So dealing with a lot of musculoskeletal things, I think I had to unlearn a lot of those beliefs that, moving in a certain way is going to cause pain. It's a correlation, but it's not a causation, right? And that's hard to unlearn. Those triggers are hard to unlearn. And then there's, stress triggers too, the pressure that I was putting on myself, the people-pleasing traits. I had to unlearn a lot of things that were causing me this type of stress as well.
Okay. But yeah, ironically, some of my patients, there can be triggers from something good that happens. Problem there is that it kind of makes you feel good about yourself in the short run, but it can at the same time make you feel like you deserved better when you were younger. It could also, particularly when it's a relationship, it can make you wonder if you are worthy of the person you're in a relationship with, and that can boost the anxiety level. I have a phrase for these that I call the good partner, bad illness syndrome, but it can also be any kind of life-affirming experience. One of my patients became ill after he was given the Employee of the Year award at his company, where there were 400 employees. So it was quite a prestigious award for him to get. Obviously a good thing, but it contrasted sharply with his growing up years when he had been told he was never going to amount to anything. And now all of a sudden he had proof that he was going to amount to something, and that triggered a lot of anger about his past mistreatment. And he was very good at suppressing anger, so it all went into his body. And so ironically, his physical illness began for the first time shortly after he received this award. Did you have anything that is remotely parallel to that? And not every one of my patients does, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, this story that came to my mind that I wanted to kind of bring it back to the very beginning of the conversation when I was 17, when I first felt that twinge in my back. I felt like my back was going out. I was just standing. What had just happened was I had completed a piano recital performance with a friend of mine, and it was this very, very big thing that we were looking forward to. I had a lot of, rehearsals put into it, and I wanted to be seen as perfect. And we did it, and we performed in front of an audience. It was for the very first time. She was singing, I was playing the piano, and it was exciting, and there was a lot of pressure. And then that pressure ended, and we got to go to the parking lot and say goodbye. And then that's when I felt it. It just started jabbing me. And I thought, well, that's really strange. But now that I think about it, it was because that stress had ended. And then my brain was probably thinking, well, what's next? Now you have to plan the next concert. Now you have to be even better. That's maybe what was going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, maybe, but also you probably got a lot of applause at that point. That would have been definitely very affirming to receive that. And there's going to be some conflict there between how you felt day to day at that time in your life and all these people giving you applause. It's going to be some kind of disconnect between those things.
So you're saying like it's this feeling of unworthiness that we still have met with this being seen and this fear of maybe, again, bringing in this fear of being seen a certain way that I was already struggling with.
Yeah,
at odds with each other.
Well, that's true that you were, certainly in a public forum at that point, and all eyes on you and the singer. So that would have been a reason for anxiety as well. But yeah, it's something that I look for in my patients. I've had a number of patients who've told me, for example, that they couldn't possibly have a stress-related illness because everything in their life is going so well. And I remember one of my patients who was again told that she was never going to amount to anything. And when she became ill was after a 6-month period of time. And in this 6-month period of time, she got her PhD. She got a great job. She got married and she adopted a kid. And she said, this is the best my life has ever been. I can't be sick from stress. And when I started talking to her about what her family life was like, she was the only person in her family to ever attend college, let alone get a PhD, and had been told continually by her mom growing up that she was going to be amount to nothing, just like all of her siblings and uncles and aunts and everybody else. So to have triumphed in her life so well raised a lot of emotions about what had gone on in the past, because her life as she had lived it completely contradicted the way she'd been treated when she was young. And she had really no solid idea of how strong those emotions were in her case.
Wow. Yeah. And again, it's kind of bringing up that conflict. Oftentimes we have a conflict of who we are, fundamentally our identity, and who we think we should be. And we're always driven by this, who we think we should be based on society, the expectations and pressures we put on ourselves, but that's not who we are.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So you've taken all of this knowledge that you acquired and you have moved into becoming a therapeutic person in this field. How has that been for you?
It's very rewarding, to help people heal themselves the same way I did. And so, yeah, I trained in pain reprocessing therapy. I'm working as a mind-body coach. So it's very rewarding helping people and people seeing results and spreading this message of hope to the world as much as I can. It's very empowering.
Are you able to share any story about a patient with confidentiality maintained, a story that stands out for you and one of your clients?
There's so many. Some of them just, they don't even realize that this is a thing. And so, luckily with social media and whatnot, people can find me and find out more about this. And it's just interesting. Everybody is so different, but I can think of clients that didn't understand that it was the pressures that they were putting on themselves that caused this. Or I have other clients that come to me that relate to my story and their sexuality and having low self-worth and all these things, and realizing, wow, if they just kind of move towards what they are feeling empowered by, something that really embracing their authenticity, that can be a very big theme. There's so many different angles that people get at this. I've had people come to me that have seen Dr. Sarno when he was still living. And so I've worked with that. And interestingly enough, there's still more layers that people find that are in there that, and this work has evolved. A lot of people, even I had my own blind spots. I hadn't done pain reprocessing therapy, even though I had been doing mind body healing for 4 years or so. I didn't know that, through a mindfulness exercise of somatic tracking, I could lean into my sensations and literally have those resolved and digested within my system. So so many clients are kind of having these aha moments, and it's really fun to witness and see that.
Yeah, that's really what kept me going in this field myself, is just to see the outcomes. My very first patient was cured by a psychiatrist. I had no idea that person's illness could even be treated a little bit by talk therapy, and to see that patient be completely cured, that was remarkable. And I learned from the psychiatrist a framework, and that's how I got started in this. And even as a bumbling beginner, people were getting better under my care, and it was a really rewarding part of my practice. And nobody came along and said, we've got people who are trained in how to do this. I was half expecting somebody to put their hand on my shoulder and say, you're a stomach specialist. You're not supposed to be talking to people about their feelings. You're supposed to be putting endoscopes inside of them and looking around. And, that hand on the shoulder never came. And I just kept getting better and better at helping people recover from this. And doctors kept sending more and more patients with undiagnosed issues. I was doing most of the second opinion cases for my entire department. And then people started sending mystery cases that were not gastrointestinal in nature. And that was kind of an interesting experience. One of my patients had itching over his entire body for 3 years. And, he had seen dermatology and neurology and several clinicians in each specialty, and he became a mystery. And so they sent him over to see me, and I said, I don't do itching. And I just thought this was going to be a waste of time. But I just said, well, it's possible that your symptoms could be due to stress. Why don't you tell me about the stresses that you've had over the course of your life, and we'll see what we come up with. And I felt bad for the man, because I thought, he's going to pour his heart out and it's going to be a waste of time. But it turned out not to be, and he had an excellent outcome. We were able to relieve his itching.
That's great. You can have that sort of curiosity mindset to say, hey, we've got nothing to lose. We can try this approach, even though maybe there was a part of you that thought, I don't know, I've never dealt with itching. Will this work? But what is there to lose? Let's try this. You're not doing anything dangerous, or it's not like you're hurting yourself by not following what your doctor is saying. If there's nothing serious going on or life-threatening, you've ruled all of those things out, then trying something different hurt.
Yeah, especially since he'd already been to see, every relevant specialist for that condition. You're absolutely right. There really wasn't anything to lose. If it turned out there wasn't anything to find. Well, at least I tried. But it's amazing how often you just ask somebody to talk to you about their stress, past and present, and just sit back and listen. And they start giving you what I call jigsaw puzzle pieces. You don't know what the final picture is going to be when they start. They usually don't give you all the pieces, but if you listen to them patiently enough, sooner or later they will give you enough pieces that you can figure out what the complete picture is going to be. I know that I wasn't nearly as good at it when I started as I was after, 10 or 15 years, and now it's been 40 years, but it's like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get. And I think for someone like yourself who's been through this journey personally for 15 years, I mean, that puts you way ahead of where I was when I started, let's put it that way. Because I didn't have this myself. I couldn't draw on my own healing journey to help patients. I had to learn pretty much everything from scratch.
Yeah, the lived experience, I know, personally, you're right. It's kind of the trial and error that I went through, and all of the things that I did wrong were, illuminating why this is working now. Everything I did that didn't work, wasn't working for a reason. And going back to those things is like what Einstein says. Insanity is described as doing the same thing over and over and
expecting a different result. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Scotty, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I think our viewers are going to be enthralled by your journey and encouraged if they're still in the middle of their own journey. Do you have any other things that you'd like to ask or like to share with people who are watching?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. And, my parting words would just be to say, stay hopeful. Stay curious, stay optimistic that this can work for you. I was once in a place where I thought, I don't think I can do this. I'm different. Everybody uniquely has this phenomenon of thinking that maybe they're the exception to the rule. So, one day at a time, see how it applies. Maybe we're not going to believe fully. And oftentimes the symptoms are the last to leave. So, the more we can keep working towards this process, and we got to kind of cut out the noise on the way as well. Sometimes when we're hearing from the physical structural approach, that's hard to shut that out. But yeah, it's very challenging. So we have to kind of stay vigilant in knowing, and we can rely on doctors like you and coaches and therapists in this space to really help build that confidence. So staying hopeful and optimistic that this can work is such a big piece of this.
Yeah, I completely agree. Try to share with a lot of my patients that the physical symptoms, as bad as they are in fact a form of communication, that your brain is trying to let you know that there's something it's not happy with. And if we can go on a search for what that is, if we can focus on what that set of issues might be instead of focusing on the physical symptoms themselves, then we can make a tremendous amount of progress.
Right. Yeah.
I should add that we are at the ATNS working on potentially providing a directory on our website for coaches in this space. So I'm optimistic that sometime this year we will have that available. There's a group that is working on some criteria for how people would get to be listed in that directory. So for any coaches that are watching, stay caught up with our website and get on our mailing list, and we'll keep you up to date on what's happening.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for everything you have done for me and everything you're doing for everyone else. And yeah, this message of hope is profound.